Okay, so I mentioned 2 weeks ago that there was a piece of Reb Yaakov's that I heard from him, and I told over to Rav Soloveitchik in 1976 in Boston. Okay, and I want to share that piece with you and share what Rav Soloveitchik said about it. I have to tell you that I didn't tell Rav Soloveitchik that my grandfather said it. I said it as if it was mine. Why? Because I was afraid, I think correctly so, that he would not really tell me the truth. Now, he wouldn't lie, but he wouldn't tell me the truth. He'd be quiet, because Versovich knew how to just be quiet. Um, so, I wanted to see what he really thought about it. So I said it over, not exactly in my name, but I said it over as if, I'm thinking about this issue. Okay. So it's really in two parts. Okay. One of the parts is in Sefer Yoshua. That's sort of part one. And then part two is in Sefer Ezra. And that's the part in the Sefer Ezra, which we'll do next week, is the part where Rav Soloveitchik lays into me about what I said.
And
Okay.
Rav Shurin, what was your
Yeah.
relationship with Rav Soloveitchik?
Okay.
How did you get to
So
connected
let's
with him?
from a couple of different angles. One angle was the easiest angle is that Rabbi Soloveitchik married my father's sister. Okay, so Rabbi Soloveitchik was my uncle, but of course, Rav Yosheber Soloveitchik was not my uncle, but he was my uncle's brother. So of course he came to all the weddings that the family made and stuff whenever he could, because he felt very much close to the family. Now beyond that, my father in 1940, when he got to America, I think I mentioned this already, he went to YU. My father came from Israel after being in Israel for close to 6 years. He came to America with his family, and everybody told him you should go to YU. Now you have to understand, my father didn't speak a word of English. But in YU, in those days, all the shurim were in Yiddish. What about the secular part of YU was probably in English, but that my father would probably have to take an ulpan to learn some English. So he came, the first day he came to Rav Soloveitchik Shir. Now that was Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yosheber's father,
Yeah.
right, dad, right? So he came to the Shir and he asked my father his name and he asked him where he's from. So he said, I just came from Eretz Yisrael, but I'm from Ritava in Lithuania. So his father said, Rav Soloveitchik's father said, so why are you coming to learn by me? My son is in Boston and he knows a million times more than me. That's what he said. So because of that, my father listened to him. My father went and traveled to Boston. Right there, he met another like 12 or 13 guys. Soloveitchik had sort of opened the kollel. He was the rabbi of Boston, the official rabbi of Boston, but he also opened the kollel, and he had about, I would say, somewhere between 12 and 13 people in the kollel. Some of them I met later on in life. My father introduced me to them. They were already, of course, my father's age, so they already had kids and grown kids. But in any event, Rav Soloveitchik taught my father for 1 year. Okay, Rav Soloveitchik shir was between 6 and 8 hours a day was the shir. Okay, you had to prepare at night, but the next day he started, let's say at 9:30. He finished like at 4:30 or 3:30 saying the shir. Okay, so he had these guys in the shir for literally 6 hours a day. So he got to know my father very well. Okay, my father was more a charismatic type of personality, so he got to know Soloveitchik very well. Now, so from that side also, besides Rabbi Soloveitchik being part of the family, he married a Shurin. My father studied under Rav Soloveitchik, so of course, when I came to Boston to learn by Rav Soloveitchik, he knew the family quite well, and he even made a comment that he likes the fact that the children of his students come back to him. He felt that's a sign that he's a good teacher if the kids come back, right? They didn't need my haskama, of course. So during that year, which I learned with Rabbi Berzon that summer, he was my chavrusa,
Rav Azaria?
Rabbi Zaria Berzon, and So during the, when Rav Soloveitchik would go to Mincha, then the shiur was not 6 hours anymore. It was about 2 hours, the shiur. You prepared in the morning, and then you had a 2-hour shiur. I think it was 3 or 4 times a week, if I remember correctly. And then I used to follow Rav Soloveitchik to his son-in-law's house. His wife was no longer alive, so he used to stay with his son-in-law a lot, Professor Twersky, Rav Isidore Yitzchak Twersky. And he would daven in his shul. And of course, I would walk him, and we would walk around, and I would walk him home. I'd walk him to the shul. And we used to schmooze. One time I walked him he wanted to buy a Newsweek, so he asked me to come with him to buy a Newsweek, and we spoke on the way. He went into like a, what do you call it, store, a candy store, which had magazines, so he bought a Newsweek there. So that's when I told him over a few things. I told him over a few things for Reb Yaakov as well, but this particular thing, I needed to see what he thinks about it truthfully, and therefore I didn't use Reb Yaakov's name. I, of course, reported back to Reb Yaakov what he had said about this Dvar Torah. And we'll talk more about it next week, because we're going to get more into the controversial part next week. This week is very, very slightly controversial, very slightly, if anything, right? But you're going to hear like a new approach, and I'm not sure Reb Yaakov's the only one it comes to this, a new approach to Sefer Dvarim. Okay, but then Reb Yaakov goes one step further, and that we'll see next week with regard to Sefer Dvarim, and that was the more controversial issue. So this starts on Nun, on page Nun. Lo yomer Sefer HaTorah zeh mipicha v'gisa bo yom v'layla. So God says to Yoshua, don't remove the Sefer Torah from your mouth. You should be involved in it day and night. Okay. Now, the Pashup shot in the Pasuk is, of course, God's telling Yoshua that he has to sit and learn Torah day and night, right? You should be toiling in it day and night, which is, of course, a very important Pasuk for any person that is learning Tanach, because you see, first and foremost, God wanted Yoshua to be involved in Torah. It's not like he became the leader of the Jewish people and now he's like, busy with being leadership. If God says to him, that sounds like he's going to be heavily involved in Torah as a leader, which is a very important idea, especially if we start looking at Yoshua as a military leader, which he was. You can get really off base off the beaten track, that Yeshua was really, first and foremost, a Makabel Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? Pirush Rashi. Now here is, Rashi comes along and says a tremendous chiddush. Sefer Mishnah Torah hayu lefanav. He had Sefer Mishnah Torah, and we know Sefer Mishnah Torah is Sefer Dvarim. Okay? So here starts the major problem. The Abarbanel interprets Rashi as Rashi saying Sefer Dvarim, and he says Rashi's wrong. Okay, it's not Sefer Dvarim, it's more than Sefer Dvarim, it's the whole Torah. Okay, because why should it be only Sefer Dvarim? Sefer HaTorah hazeh mipicha, right? Now, in brackets, Reb Yaakov says something that I'm not so sure what he means, and I always learned the Rashi a bit different. V'hainu sherashi dayik miloshen hazeh, the mashma shemara be'etzba. Right? When it says Achodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodashim. So Rashi, of course, says he showed him what the moon looks like. Right? So he says over here also, Rashi was medayik the Lashon Hazeh, Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, right? That he's pointing to it. So I don't know what that is helpful for. I always learned this Rashi means that it's going back on, normally you say Sefer HaTorah Hazos, because Torah is feminine, so you have Zos, right? Here it says Sefer Torah Hazeh, going back on the Sefer. Okay, not on the Torah. Sefer is Lashon Zachar, right? So that there was a Sefer here, right? It doesn't mean the whole Torah. It means there was a Sefer of the Torah. That's the way I learned the Rashi. But Reb Yaakov somehow wants to be medayik. Again, everybody's, that what Reb Yaakov is bothered with is what is bothering Rashi here, that he says Sefer Mishnah Torah Hayu Lefanov, right? That he had Sefer Mishnah Torah, right? By the way, this Rashi is a medrash, and at the end of the piece of Reb Yaakov, we'll see that it was actually a medrash in Bereshis Rabbah, and we'll get a better idea of what once you see what Reb Yaakov says, and then you see the medrash will be enlightening. Otherwise, we don't really know. Maybe for a second, I'll let me see if I have it here. Let's see. At the end, I think Reb Yaakov quotes the medrash. Yeah. There's a medrash in Bereshis Rabbah that says like this: Domer Reb Shimon bar Yochai, Sefer Mishnah Torah hayisignon liYoshua. Sefer Mishnah Torah was a signon for Yehoshua, meaning it was it was what's the word we would use for signon? It was his signon is it defined Yehoshua.
His calling card.
What?
His calling card.
His calling card. That's better, actually. The calling card of Yehoshua. B'shasha niglo of HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzo Yoshev v'sefer Mishnah Torah b'yado. Reb Shimon bar Yochai says when God appeared to him, he found him learning Mishnah Torah. Amalo chazak Yoshua amatz Yoshua lo yomush sefer HaTorah zeh. Okay, that's what God said. He found him learning Mishnah Torah, and that's what he said. Okay, so that's where Rashi gets his idea. Sefer Mishnah Torah hayisignon liYoshua. Rashi says Sefer Mishnah Torah hayu lefanav. Okay, but that's the medrash. Okay, so Reb Yaakov says v'hainu the sovle the had the kosuv b'dvarim yud zayin yud ches v'kosav lo es Mishnah Torah by the melech. It says when he becomes melech v'haya kishifto, when he'll sit on Kisei Mamlachto, v'kosav lo es Mishnei Torah, hainu lo Sefer Torah sheni bilvad. This is not including, it's not included only the second Sefer Torah that he's writing, right? It says that even if he had a Sefer Torah, he has to write another Sefer Torah, one that the Gemara says stays in his home, and the other one that goes out with him in front of him all the time. K'moshe Kiblu Chazal in Sanhedrin, Chazal say that he had two Sifrei Torah, and this was the second one he wrote. Because of Mishneh Torah Azot, he has to write his own Sefer Torah, even if he has one from his father's. Elagam Sefer Meyuchad Shel Sefer Dvarim. But included in this, Kosovlas Mishneh Torah, a new idea is Al Pi Pshat, is Sefer Dvarim. And that's why it says Mishneh Torah, because Mishneh Torah is Sefer Dvarim. So besides the Medrash halacha that Chazal give us that it means a second Sefer Torah, it also means Mishnah Torah. Now, the Rabbi Yaakov is going to show that there's actually a Sifrei that says this. Okay, it's not Rabbi Yaakov saying it's a Sifrei that says it. Okay, he's not saying that it's excluded. What not that the Melech is not writing to Sifrei Torah, but besides that, it says Mishnah Torah in order for us to be medayik that he had a separate sefer called Mishnah Torah. Elagam sefer miyuchad shel sefer dvarim. Okay. Umash nishtana sefer zeh mikol haTorah kula. And why is this sefer different that you're making it separate than the rest of the other four svarim? Hainu mishum shekem atzinu b'mitzvahs hakel dichsiv dvarim lamed aleph yud aleph tikre es haTorah azos neged kol Yisrael bazneihem. You know, the mitzvah of hakel was that at the end of Shemitah, according to Chazal, the end of Shemitah, the Melech would gather everybody together in Yerushalayim. They would build a bama, right? Like a little thing, like what the Melech would sit there and have the Sefer Torah there, right? And he would read the Torah. V'kiblu Chazal dahainu Sefer Dvarim. Chazal Amakabel. It's a Mishnah Masechet Sota that he didn't read the whole Sefer Torah. He read Sefer Dvarim, and as you guys know, in Israel, we actually have a minhag like this, that some people read it every Hoshana Rabbah, but a lot more people on the 8th year of after Shemitah, right after Shemitah, you'll see by the Kotel they get together, and they even invite the Nasi to read some of the Torah. The Nasi, Herzog to read, because the Nasi is like the Melech, so to speak, right? The Kibul Chazal Dahainu Sefer Dvarim Ulefikach Pirish Kan Shesefer Zen Nitztavu Yoshua. Therefore, Rashi explains here that the Sefer over here was a Sefer of that Yeshua was commanded. Shelo Yomash Mipiv Yego Bo Yom V'Layla. That's why, because we see in Dvarim that the Melech read from the Sefer Dvarim, right? So the Melech had to have a separate Sefer called Sefer Dvarim. Now, you don't have to learn like that. You could learn that he had the whole Torah, but he turned it to Sefer Dvarim like we do today, right? But as we'll see, Chazal do talk about this, and they say that, when the Chazal say this, they say Sefer Dvarim, right? That he had Sefer Dvarim. But you could learn it, you could catch in there that it's the whole Torah, but he read from Sefer Dvarim. But Rabbi Yaakov learns that Rashi said Sefer Mishnah Torah because that was the Sefer the Melech read from on the 8th year. So that was Shayich to Malchus. Okay, normally what do we learn? Why did the king read Sefer Dvarim? The way I always, as a kid, remember it was because it's the shorter part of the Torah, right? There's a repetition in the Torah, right? And that's the short version, right? So you don't read the whole 5 books of Moshe. You don't read the whole Chumash. You read the Sefer Dvarim because that sort of encapsulates the whole Torah. That's why I always learn. Of course, Reb Yaakov says that's not correct. He doesn't even bother with that. He just says, right, that he's going to say there's something special about Sefer Dvarim for the king. Okay, and here's where Reb Yaakov comes up with his chiddush. Okay, now I'm not sure. It could be other people say this chiddush, and you guys can let me know if other people say this chiddush. But that's what Reb Yaakov is about to say, right? And that's why he says, Yoshua, he said, this sefer should not be removed from you day or night because it's shayich to the Melech. And Yeshua, of course, we already had the whole shtickle Torah that Yeshua has a din of Melech. The only chiddush over here is that he had a din of Melech, but with regard to what? Now we see, Rabbi Yaakov is going to point this out, that he had a mitzvah of being a Melech, or a mitzvah of Malchus, as Rabbi Yaakov called it, right, with regard to Sefer Dvarim. And it actually makes sense why he does have this, even if he doesn't have a mitzvah to write 2 Sifrei Torah, to write a second Sefer Torah, right? Because over there it says when he'll sit on his chair, right, on his throne, he'll write this. Yeshua never had a throne. No shoftim had thrones, okay? They didn't have that type of malchus, okay? So, but this Sefer is still shaykh to the king, and he'll soon explain why. And that's why Rashi, he says, felt that Yeshua had Sefer Dvarim in front of him, but you still have to explain why was he learning at that point when God appears to him, Sefer Dvarim, right? And the way Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says it was the calling card, as Michael said, of Yoshua. Like, why is it the calling card? So Reb Yaakov was going to try to explain all that. Okay, now I will tell you, Reb Yaakov was fond of a story, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky included at the bottom in number 63, so I'm going to tell it to you. Okay? Baal Peh Sipur Rabbeinu, you see that 63? Baal Peh Sipur Rabbeinu Shaya Shochid Ubodek Echad Korov Mishpachto Belita Bezmano Shor Rabbi Yisrael Salanter Shaya Osik Moshe Kosel B'Ramah. There was a shochet that was a relative to Reb Yaakov who was in the time of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Remember, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter died about 1881, 82 or something like that. Rabbi Yaakov was born 1891, probably about 10 years after Rabbi Yisrael Salanter died. And he had a relative that lived, anyone that was a bit older than Reb Yaakov, 20 years older than Reb Yaakov, lived in the time of Rabbi Shol Salanter, or 30 years older than Rabbi Yaakov. He lived in the time of Rabbi Shol Salanter. Rabbi Yaakov, I mentioned many times that he spoke to people who knew Rabbi Shol Salanter. So he says he lived in the time of Rabbi Shol Salanter, and he would do like the Ramaz says in Hilchas Shchita, Siman Aleph, Sif Aleph, sheyachsu leprokim Hilchas Shchita, sheyushkurim bepiv ubelibel sheyishkachem. The Ramah, if you remember in Hilchas Shchita, the first Sif in Hilchas Shchita writes, there's a long Ramah there, and one of the things he writes is that a shochet should always go over leprokim from time to time. I think it starts off at every 30 days. You should go over Hilchas Shchita, which is not an easy task, okay? So he says, besides learning Hilchas Shchita again and again, he would go over every 6 months on 3 prakim, the first 3 prakim of Chulin, which deals with Hakol Shochtim, Im Harif, next page, Rambam, Rosh, Tur Shulchan Aruch, Utvu Ashar, V'Simla Chadasha. These are all svarim on Hilchas Shchita. Vayakor al atzmo mikra zeh, ki im b'toras Hashem cheftzo. A person should always have the desire of Torah Hashem. Shecheftzu lilmod kol Torah kula, the Torah Hashem. Avol Toraso yega yom v'layla. But in his own Torah, he should be involved day and night. What does that mean, his own Torah? The Torah, it's a shaykh to him. In other words, if you're a businessman, you have to go over Choshen Mishpat. If you're a shochet, you have to go over Hilchas Shchita. If you're a Moel, Hilchas Mila, right? That's who b'torasa yega yom v'layla. That's what the shochet, my grandfather's cousin, used to say, right? That in his Torah he goes over day and night, right? B'torasa shenogas lo yega yom v'layla. V'Rabbeinu himshul bazeh machin etztav Yeshul mil tzofer dvarim yom v'layla ki hu sefer miyuchad shel melech ki mishpatav he mishpatei hamelucha k'moshen izbar behemshech. And that's why when God appeared to Yoshua, according to Rashi, Yoshua had sefer Mishnah Torah and nothing else, because that is shaykh to Malchus. How's it shaykh to Malchus? Great question. And that's what Reb Yaakov is going to attempt over here to show you. Okay? So, page Nun Aleph at the top. Ve'im Nemar. Okay? Kain, Yotzalonu, the Mishnah Torah, Ein Ze Dafka Ala Melech, El Gam Ala Shofet. So then, if we're going to learn like Rashi, that Mishnah Torah was in front of him, and we know that the king read in Mishnah Torah on the 8th year, after Shemitah, right after Shemitah. So we see that even though he doesn't have an obligation necessarily, I'm putting this in parentheses, not to write a second Sefer Torah, but he does have, there is an inyan for him to have the Mishnah Torah in front of him. Okay? Just like any Melech used to read from Mishnah Torah, there was a reason why he read from Mishnah Torah. And as I said, it's not because it was the shortened version of the first 4 books, right? There was a special reason why a Melech had a shaykhis to Mishnah Torah. But Rabbi Yaakov says, you see, the Shofet, because Yeshua was a Shofet, he was not really a Melech. He had Dini Malchus, right? Morid b'Malchus, Chayiv Misa, according to Yeshua, right? That's why B'nai Gad, B'nai Reuven were able to say, Kolisha Shei Yamras Bicha Yumas, right? But he also had this as well. Ulefize Gamosh Rabbeinu Hayu Lo B'Tor Shofet Sefer Zev and Nikra Sefer Moshe. And Moshe Rabbeinu also had this, right? And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he said the parsha of Hakel, he was also referring to himself, that he would also have this if they would go into Eretz Yisrael, if you go into Eretz Yisrael. Zeh Sefer Zen Torah Shofet Sefer Zev and Nikra Sefer Moshe. Okay, it's called Sefer Moshe. Now, where does Rabbi Yaakov get it's called Sefer Moshe? There's something very interesting in Tanach. Sefer Devarim is quoted a few times, and each time it doesn't say Sefer Toras Moshe. Like at the end of Tanakh, it says Zichru Toras Moshe, right? In Malachi, remember Toras Moshe, right? And a lot of times it says Sefer Toras Moshe, but when it refers to Sefer Devarim, okay, it says Sefer Moshe. And that's what Reb Yaakov points out over here, but he doesn't explain it. Okay, next week, Reb Yaakov's going to explain it. Okay, why this is called Dafka, Dvarim is called Sefer Moshe, and not part of Sefer Torah's Moshe. Okay, by the way, when it's referring to the Torah in general, it always says Torah's Moshe, Sefer Torah's Moshe. When it, when David HaMelech has to keep the whole Torah, so God says Sefer Torah's Moshe, right? Chukim u'mishpatim, mitzvot, right? V'ayim Ramban, Dvarim Lamed Aleph Tet, Shekosav al Masha Kosav Yichta Moshe Torah Azos. He says Moshe wrote this Torah mitchilas bereshis ad le'nei kol Yisrael. He says it doesn't mean Moshe only wrote Sefer Dvarim. It means he wrote the whole Torah misbereshis ad le'nei kol Yisrael. Va'afal pisha bekan kosav tikras Torah Azos neged kol Yisrael. In the next pasuk, it says that you should read this Torah neged kol Yisrael. V'hu romez l'sefer hazeh shel elu dvarim al das Rabbeinu. This is the Ramban. According to the Rabbeinu, he's not reading the whole Torah, the Melech. He's only reading Sefer Dvarim, Ayin Sham, right? The Ramban says, even though the pasuk after it, a couple of pasuk later, it's talking about Sefer Dvarim, according to Chazal, but when it says Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Torah, it means the whole Torah. Ayin Sham. Okay, look at the Ramban. Vatam nirali, and the reason, meaning, why does the Melech read Sefer Dvarim? Now Reb Yaakov gets to that finally. Kisha amdu Yisrael nechonim likanes la'aretz hutzrach Moshe lahoratam biyuchad hamitzvah shem yuchados biyoslu tikkun anhogas hamadinu mishpatem. That's why the Sefer Dvarim was so important to Moshe, right? Because when the Jews were getting ready to enter the land, Moshe had to teach them the mitzvos that are special, right, for making sure the country and its laws go down properly. And that's Sefer Dvarim. Sefer Dvarim is a sefer about living in the land of Israel as a nation. Okay? That's what Reb Yaakov is beginning to say over here. And that's why the Melech reads this, and Moshe Rabbeinu set this up for the Melech to read it, meaning every 8th year the Melech's going to read this in order to reestablish the idea, right, that this Sefer is shayach to the Melech. And that's why the Melech reads it and not the Kohen. And, Kohanim were involved in giving the Torah, meaning, right, ki sifsei Torah yishmeru das, or, in Zos HaBracha, it talks about, Levi doing this. But the king actually does it because Sefer Dvarim has a special shaykhis to the kingdom. Dahainu, kol mitzvahs b'sefer Mishnah Torah nosim ofi leumi. All the mitzvahs in Sefer Dvarim, carry with it, right, a nature of national. Ofi leumi means a national nature to it. Okay, they're not for the yichidim, the mitzvahs in Sefer Dvarim. They're relevant to the nation. Okay, so they have an ofi leumi. Okay, now what Reb Yaakov is doing over here is setting up the idea that Sefer. Now, certain things, come from other svarim that are repeated in Mishnah Torah. Right? That's why people call it Mishnah Torah. They think, right? But Reb Yaakov says that's not the reason. The reason why they was repeated was because they're shaykh to ofi leumi. Those were the ones that were repeated. The ones that are not shaykh lofi leumi were not repeated. Okay, and now Reb Yaakov is going to take upon himself a very difficult task to show you how mitzvos in Sefer Dvarim are ofi leumi mitzvos, right? They're shaykh to the melech and not to the Beit Din and not to the common people, okay? Because there are mitzvos that are shaykh to the Beit Din. I'll give you an example. The Gemara in Kedushin says, and it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, that if a father didn't perform milah on his child, the Beis Din is supposed to do it. The Beis Din is in charge. It never says the Melech is supposed to do it. It's the Beit Din. The Beis Din is really in charge of making sure we're keeping mitzvot. Okay? Zot omer echad lo yoshev b'sukkah. If someone doesn't sit in a sukkah, b'shvil zeh yesh sanhedrin l'shmol akim hamitzvos b'am Yisrael. Then you have a beis din, right? I know that maybe you never knew that if a guy doesn't want to sit in a sukkah, that beis din gets involved. But yes, in the time when you had a real beit din, the beit din used to get involved. And if the guy didn't want to sit in sukkah, of course, they used to smack him around until he would sit in the sukkah. Or if you didn't want to be Mekayim Lulav, right? If we didn't want to, be Mekayim the mitzvah of matzah, also, the beis din would take care of that. Okay? And the melech didn't have to get involved in this. The melech only got involved in things that were le'umi. Aval shelo yavo mamzerim b'kahal Hashem shnei b'chumash dvarim al zeh hamelech achrei. That, in other words, the kahal Hashem shouldn't become impure, and that's why it says lo yavo mamzer b'kahal Hashem, not b'Yisrael, b'kahal Hashem, because that is shaykh to the kahal, and we don't want impurities in the kahal Hashem. That's shaykh to the melech, he says. V'chein isuri arayis shebechumash vayikra ena shaykh lemelech. All the arayis, okay, in vayikra acharei mos, right, kedoshim, they're shaykh to individuals, and therefore they're not repeated in dvarim. Aval isur eishes of shenemar b'chumash dvarim. Now here's a major problem, because there is one arayos, which, if you've ever noticed this, okay, in Chaf Gimel Pasuk Aleph. Okay, I'll just take it out for a second. Chaf Gimel Pasuk Aleph. Let's see if it has over here. It talks about all the parsha of rape. Okay, it talks about the parsha of rape, and then right after the parsha of rape, right, it says lo yikach ish es eishes aviv lo yigala knaf aviv. A person's not allowed to take the wife of his father and reveal the nakedness of the father, the knaf shel aviv, right? And then the next pasuk is lo yavo pitzua dako krus shifcha b'kahal Hashem lo yavo mamzer b'kahal Hashem, right? Lo yavo amoni u'mavi b'kahal Hashem. Nobody knows what this pasuk is doing here, okay? And Reb Yaakov is going to have trouble with it, because it sounds like one of the arayos that you're not allowed to marry, right, your father's wife. It sounds almost like that your father died and you're not allowed to marry his wife, but it's not your mother, obviously, because that we know already before. You're not allowed to do that. It's your father's second, another wife that you're not the son of. You're not allowed to marry her either, right? Now, the way Rashi learns it, that means Chazal, he says, V'lo yigala knaf aviv, shomeret yivam shel aviv haruya la'aviv. In other words, it's not really a case of marrying your father's wife, right? It's a case, obviously, after the father dies. It's really the case the father's alive, but the father's brother died. And now Rashi says the father would have to marry his brother's wife. And instead, you go and marry the wife, right? So that is usher, right? And not only usher, I don't remember, it may be, it's either Kores or Misa, but I think it's Kores if you marry her, okay? Because she's a Shomeres Yibam, right? She's a Shomeres Yibam. And therefore, you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to marry her till this Yiv Mochlita, okay? So Reb Yaakov wants to know why is this here? So he says, Avalissa Eishazav Shenema B'chumash Dvarim Nimtza B'achrayus Shel HaMelech, right? Is part of the achrayus of the king. Einenu Yodim Lama Zekacha. We don't know why it is thus. Ulam Kivin Shezanichtav Shub B'chumash Dvarim Hareisha Zuhi Mitzvah Umit Medinit. It must be a mitzvah that has a shaykhis to national Medina is a national country halacha, national state halacha. Okay. Now he's going to give other ones, but he doesn't really explain this. I don't know why Reb Yaakov didn't simply say What about Yivum? Okay, Yivum, it's only in Sefer Dvarim. It's nowhere else. Okay, so we'll talk about that soon. Okay, it's part of the mitzvah of Yivum. If the son's not allowed to marry the father's Yavama, so it's part of the mitzvah of Yivum. But let's take a look what Reb Yaakov says so we'll understand it better. Dugma nosefes mitzvahs makeh umezuzah. Okay, the mitzvah of makeh, which is like the fence around your roof, right? And mezuzah, where is that written? Only in Sefer Dvarim, right? It's not written anywhere else. It's in Sefer Dvarim. Okay, both Shema and V'hayim Shemoah is in Sefer Dvarim. Hayu b'achrayis hamelach shayitzorach l'shloach shotrim mitayim l'ashkiach shekacha yira bayit Yehudi. Okay, the Melech was in charge of the nation and how a Jewish home should look. Okay, and therefore mezuzah, as opposed to let's say Mila, is shayich to the Melech. Mashenke mitzvahs Mila shalhaita b'achriyusa. He didn't have the mitzvah of Mila. V'yitochen shahevdelu ki zeh b'tzina v'zeh b'farhesya. A mezuzah and a makkah is open. You see the mezuzah on the door, or you don't see the mezuzah on the door because it's not there. Or a makkah on the roof, and you don't see the makkah because it's not there. But the mitzvah of Mila, you don't have to do b'farhesya. You can do it in your house, right? So the mitzvah of makkah and the mitzvah of makkah and mezuzah are shaykh to the king, and that's why it's in Sefer Dvarim. Mitzvahs Yivum nemer b'chumash Dvarim. See, this is why I don't understand. Reb Yaakov could have used this, what he's about to say here, for before. Kanereb mipnei she'inyan sheyokum al shem nachalosu huyin soziali. To go on, in other words, it's part of our social fabric to have yibum, right? To make sure, and that's yibum, and we even had, like in Sefer Rus, a sort of yibum also, meaning that it's shaykh to the Jewish people, to make sure sociologically, right, the woman gets remarried, she starts a new family, right? So that is shaykh. By the way, what about Kedushin and Gittin? Where is that written? Sefer Dvarim, right? Right? Why? Because that is shaykh to building a family, right? Building a family is shaykh to the klal. Okay? Now, Rabbi Yaakov doesn't say that, but to me it's obvious, right? All the wars, right? How to fight a war. It's not in Sefer Bamidbar, it's all in Sefer Devarim, because that has to do with a national ideology, fighting a war, or the mitzvah of having a king is also in Sefer Devarim. So Rabbi Yaakov doesn't even discuss those because they're obvious, okay? V'lo b'nam lamakom. It's not just a mitzvah b'nam lamakom to marry your brother's wife. It's to make sure the social fabric works well. Okay? For ulai, kach gam mitzvos makeh. Shei mitzvos l'tikun hachevra. Right? What is mitzvos makeh? It's a mitzvah l'tikun hachevra. Right? To make sure that people are not killed. Right? That's not a private mitzvah. This is a mitzvah to keep the land of Israel safe. So you build a home, you have to build a makeh. Yeshem yonim ruchanim kabirim. Of course, all these mitzvahs have very spiritual ideas as well. Aval kivan shem lumim elam shaychus liyechidim el lemelech. Because they're lumim, they're shaykh to the king, and therefore they're in Sefer Dvarim. V'lachei mitzvahs mechias hamolek he b'Sefer Dvarim. Of course, mitzvahs mechias hamolek, which is a national. It's a national what do you
obligation,
call it? Right? It's someone attacking the nation, right? That of course is going to be in Sefer Dvarim. The mitzvahs in Sefer Dvarim. We have it in Sefer Shmos, but the mitzvah Mechias Hamolek, right, is in Sefer and the Parshas Ki Tetzei, right? That's in Sefer Dvarim, right? Because it is a threat to the Jewish people. Kamoke. But Parshas HaMoadah shall solve Parshas Rei. Now we have Moadim in other parts of the Torah. Parshas Emor has the Moadim. In Parshas Rei you have the Moadim too. But you guys always notice there's something missing there. Rosh Hashanah is not there. Yom Kippur is not there. Okay. Shemini Atzeres is not there. Okay. So he says, but Parshas Rei Einam Muskam Shemini Atzeres Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It has the Sholosh Regalim, right? It has Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. But Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, what happened to those that you have in Parshas Emor, right? So Reb Yaakov says, those are matters of dat. They have nothing to do with the Am. Matters of dat. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, right? Ulam shloshes haregalim. Why are you going up l'regel? The whole nation goes up l'regel because it's something that has shaychus to lumit. V'chein bali l'regel she'am tzorch la'alot l'regel l'beis hamikdash she'nimtza be'ira b'Rash HaMelech. Where's the Beis Hamikdash? Where the kingdom is, right? So it's shaykh to the kingdom aliyah l'regel, whereas Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is not shaykh to the kingdom. It's shaykh. You go to your shul or you daven in your house on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right? You blow your shofar, you fast on Yom Kippur, like when we had the COVID, right? A lot of people didn't go to shul, but they still had Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But aliyah l'regel you can't have, because there your whole nation has to get together. Ukmosha rakli b'sefer Ezra, be'Ezra, Gimel Beis, u'b'od makom Beis Hamikdash tol b'melech. Rabbi Yaakov has a whole piece showing that, of course, it's even the Pashup Pshat. After we made a melech, then there was a mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash, not before. And the Malchus was right, Ir David was right next to Har HaBayis. V'chein ro'on sha'melech Chizkiyahu tziva al asiyas korban Pesach. V'chein Yoshio tziva al asiyas korban Pesach. In Divrei Yomim, both those kings, Chizkiyahu and Yoshio, commanded about korban Pesach. Ulachora yitzorch lios korban Pesach b'chreis haKohen HaGadol kimemuna al avodas Beis Hamikdash. Why was he in charge of it? It says Vayas Chizkiyahu, Vayas Yoshiyahu. Why is it shaykh to the Melech, the korban Pesach? Elavadai shechag Pesach v'korban Pesach heim chag v'korban halaum. Chag Pesach is a national holiday. More than any other holiday, our nation became free, right? Something that's national, the king's involved in that, right? That's what Rabbi Yaakov says. Why in Divrei Yomim it says that Dafka says that King Chizkiyahu made the Pesach, and it says King Yoshio made the Pesach because that is shayach to them. Ulehefech Achav asa et habal la'alil halumi shelo, but Achav started bringing in the Baal into the Jewish people. Et Hashem, and someone who continued serving God had to hide. No, really, you should wonder, why is he so upset that the Jews are still serving God, Achav? Guy doesn't want to serve the Baal. Wants to serve. He says because for him, the Baal became a national god. And therefore, anyone who doesn't do it is a morid b'malchus. Okay? O dugma b'divrei hayamim, chav hey dalet, kosuf es b'neim lo heimis, kika kosuf b'torah b'sefer Moshe. Again, here it says, in divrei hayamim, es b'neim lo heimis, Amatzia killed people who rebelled against, who killed his father. When he got the kingdom established, Amatzia, and he was already ruling very strongly, he took the people who were in charge of, who got together to kill his father, and he killed them. But the children he didn't kill. The children they didn't kill. The minhag was to kill the kids too. Why? Because, as you know, what's not politically correct, if your father belongs to Hamas, you could imagine what the kid is going to grow up to be, right? There are exceptions to the rule, but the rule is that the kid is going to be hearing Hamas, Hamas, Hamas from age 4, and he's going to grow up to hate the Jews, right? So that's the king usually killed the children too. But Amatzi said, I can't. Sefer Moshe, right? What does it say in Sefer Moshe? Lo yumsu avos al banim, banim lo yumsu al avosam. Right? It quotes the pasuk there from Sefer Dvarim. Okay? Pirish b'toch haTorah yesh Sefer Moshe, v'hu Sefer Dvarim. V'shekosov shalola miset et habonim shalamor d'mamalchus. V'akavana, what was the kavana? Lepasik bidvarim leyumsu avos albanim ubanim leyumsu avos. Now we know that the Gemara learns this, that you can't kill a father or a son through the father, right? Means the father can't testify, can't be an aid. But that's not the Pashut Pshat. If you look at the Sforno, he learns it's on a mord b'malchus. All right, the Melech, the Pashut Pshat is your Melech usually kills the kids also, but the Torah says you're not allowed to. That's the chiddush of the Torah. Limsu avos albanim, right? So you have two things. You have the Pashut Pshat in the text, and then you have the drash, right? The drash is what Rashi brings, but there's a Pashut Pshat that so what is this? Okay, that's the way the Divrei Hayomim learned, right? In Divrei Hayomim, they're quoting this pasuk. So obviously, it's saying Amasya didn't kill because of this pasuk. So this pasuk is shaykh to Malchus, right? So you see that Sefer Dvarim has psukim that are shaykh to Malchus, even though it doesn't appear. Pashut Pshat is that it's shaykh. It is shaykh to Malchus. Kamo morid b'Malchus. The chiddush hapasuku she'af shebedin haya raui laoreg et kol mishpachas hamorid b'Malchus kamo shebifiboshes hoded b'pem malei leDavid HaMelech. Really, the king should be killing the whole family because the morid the Malchus, he can't trust the family, right? But like Mephibosheth, grandson of Shaul, said, right? Ayin Shamash Kosov Sham Ki lo haya kol beis avi ki im anshe mavos ladeni hamelech. Mephibosheth says to David, not only the people who rebelled against you, but kol ki im anshe ki kol haya kol beit avi, the whole household were chayiv misa. Mikolach b'Torah b'tzav shelo yumsu ovas albanim obanim obanim o alavosa. I don't know what it says over there. Lo yumsu ovas albanim obanim alavosa. Okay. In other words, what is he saying? That you see clearly that Sefer Dvarim has things that are shaykh to the kingdom. Okay, and so that's Reb Yaakov's idea that. Any halach, any mitzvah you see in Sefer Dvarim has to have a shaykhus le'umi. It has to have an ofi of le'umi, a shaykhus to the malchus, a sociological thing, right? And that's why, if you look at a lot of the different, marriage, divorce, all the different men and women issues, right? Yivum is all in Sefer Devarim. That's where Reb Yaakov's ideas, and that's why Yoshua had Sefer Devarim in front of him when God spoke to him. Why? Because they were about to go into the land of Israel, right? And what does the shochet have to do right before Shechita? He has to go over Hilchos Shechita. Yoshua had the Sefer Mishnah Torah in front of him, according to Rashi, who brings that medrash, in order, right, that the people, that he should know what he has to do when he gets into Eretz Yisrael, how to fight a war, right? All the wars you can have. You have to know the halachas of the wars, right? So that is Reb Yaakov's idea why Sefer Dvarim is shaykh to the Malchus, according to Chazal and according to Rashi, okay? And that's why Rashi learned the way he did, because that happens to be shaykh to the Malchus, and that's why the king reads Sefer Dvarim, not because it's a shortened version of the Torah, but it's shaykh to Malchus. He's every 8 years he's reminding himself, reminding the nation, what the Malchus has to do for the nation, right? This is what the Malchus is chayiv in the nation. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, we'll stop here.
How did Rav Soloveitchik respond?
No, so that part Rav Soloveitchik didn't respond to. I'll tell you the part he responded to, but that we'll learn next week. He responded to the next half where Reb Yaakov gets very daring. And he says that Sefer Devarim is repeated from Sefer Bereshit Shmot Vayikra Midbar as well, right? Like Aliyah L'Regel is it also there, but it's also here, right? So Reb Yaakov says all the 4 Svarim Moshe Rabbeinu wrote as a secretary that God dictated to Moshe what to write. Sefer Dvarim, Moshe Rabbeinu arranged himself. That's what he says, Reb Yaakov. And he's going to prove it. That Sefer Dvarim is different than the other 4 Sfarim, which of course sounds like apikursis, basically. But Reb Yaakov is going to prove it. That Sefer Dvarim is different than the other 4 Sfarim. And that's why the Tanach always calls it Sefer Moshe. Not Sefer Torah's Moshe, Torah, Sefer Moshe. It is the Sefer Moshe because he organized it according to being a constitution of the Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, but that we'll see next week, and that's the part that Reb Soloveitchik commented on. But I'll leave you to guess until next week what he said. Okay. Any other questions, guys?
This Brit Milah, I understand that it's different than Makeh and Mezuzah because it's private versus those. The nature of the other 2 are public, but still Brit Milah is. I mean, that's one of the defining features of bringing someone to the Jewish people. It sounds like a very nationalistic mitzvah. It's also always coupled with Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is mentioned as one of the nationalistic mitzvahs.
I think that's why Reb Yaakov kvetched what he kvetched because of your question. He said it is. He didn't want to say it's not nationalistic because you're right. I mean, in order to make a Jew, you need to do a Brit Milah, right? That sounds pretty serious, right? As far as being an official
Lumi,
right? And we can even go one step further because I think during different gzeirot of Malchios on Yisrael, Rome, and Yavan, I think there was a gzeira there on Mila as well. So it tells you that they viewed it as Lumit because they didn't make a gzeira. They didn't make a gzeira. You can't shake a lulav, right? They made a gzeira on Mila, you know. So it does sound like that, but that's why I think Reb Yaakov said it. You know, one can even say it's Lumit, but it's private. So it's not. It's shaykh to the Beis Din because it's private. It's not shaykh to the king, right? He doesn't say it as for sure. He says ulai, right? He says ulai because I think of what you're saying. Because he says maybe that's the difference over here. That something that's public is shaykh to the melech, and something that's private is shaykh to the Beis Din. That's what he's learning. But I like your question because I had the same question, and I based it on the fact that there's gzeiras to the malchus, right? There are gzeiras, and the malchios like Rome and other things. I'm pretty sure they were gozer on so they were gozer at one point on tefillin, and they were gozer at one point on Mila, maybe all of them, gzeira on Torah, right? Now Torah is okay because Torah we have in Sefer Devarim, right? Right? It's all in Sefer Dvarim, so that works out great for Reb Yaakov because if anything is national, it's Torah, right? And that's what Reb Yaakov basically is saying is that those laws are all relative to the king to make sure that Torah is being studied. By the way, it says like this: that this is a Gemara. And the Gemara is medayik from a pasuk, but it's a Gemara. The Gemara says in Masechta Sanhedrin that like in the time of Chizkiyahu Melech, right? Lo matzu ish v'isha tinik ninokish lo yubekim b'tumas and taras, right? So again, Reb Yaakov would say, "What do you mean time of Chizkiyahu? Why are you mentioning Chizkiyahu? If you look at the Gemara there, Chizkiyahu is the one who made sure it would happen. Because what does it say there? Anyone who leaves the Beit Midrash, I'm going to cut his head off." That's what it says over there. The Chizkiyahu said, anyone who leaves the Beit Midrash, I'm going to cut his head off, right? Why Chizkiyahu is going to do that? Why isn't the Beis Din doing it? The answer is that's studying Torah is a national idea. It's not a private. Besides being a mitzvah pratit, it's a mitzvah. It's a national mitzvah. And therefore, he was in charge of it, right? So there's a lot of things you're going to find that are going to make much more sense using Reb Yaakov's idea. Now, I have a feeling that other people have done this too. I just don't know. I don't know that other people have tried to figure out why mitzvahs are repeated in Dvarim that were already said, and why there's new mitzvahs in Dvarim, right? And a lot of the new mitzvahs. What?
Does Rabbi Yaakov apply this also to the beginning of Dvarim and the end of Dvarim, or just halacha?
Rabbi Yaakov was only here talking about halachas, but he would tell you about the beginning of Dvarim, which is not halacha, correct?
Yeah, but it's very personal hashkafa.
Right. Well, it's Moshe Rabbeinu giving hashkafa to the Jewish people, right?
It's different from Yom Kippur. I mean, that's, you know.
Moshe Rabbeinu in first person, and I'm going to stress that in first person, right, is giving Musar to the Jewish people, right? And he talks about the Jews as a nation there. He doesn't talk about individual. He talks about the Jews as a nation. By the way, over there is also, you're not allowed to marry a non-Jew. You're not allowed to marry from the Shivat Umot, right? That's at the beginning, I think in Vet Hanan, right? In other words, again, those are mitzvos that can affect the national nature of the Jewish people, and therefore.
The first paragraph of Shema is for the individual, and the second one's for the nation.
What, Shema Yisrael?
Yeah, that's for the individual.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is. Let me check what it says over there. I'll get back to you about it. The second one seems to definitely be V'hayim Shema. Seems to be more national, right? Mm-hmm. But the first one, let me check to see. Reb Yaakov, maybe he discusses it in Chumash, maybe he doesn't, right? But because he doesn't go through every one. I wish he would have gone through the whole Sefer Dvarim piece by piece. He just gives us like a little bit of a taste of what he's thinking about. But he doesn't really go through each thing that I guess he left to us to do. But I hear your question. So let me look into it, and I'll get back to you about it.
Also, we have many more arayas in the Barach and the Klala.
Many more
arayas
in the brachas and the bracha and Klala in Parshas Kitavo.
Right.
Okay, but the Parshas Kitavo, the brachas and Klolas there seem to be very on a national level. No, it's not a individual, is it?
I'd say it's very individual because it's all about you shouldn't hide in your room and do these things, kind of thing.
I hear what you're saying. So that would be B'tzina more, you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, let me check it. I'll get back to you about it. Okay. By the way, the brachas and Klolos, the Gemara says Moshe Rabbeinu says in first person as opposed to third person, and Reb Yaakov is going to discuss that and say for Torah. Okay. We'll take it up next week, Bezrat Hashem.
Yeshakar, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.